in person at 12 noon on December 14th, 2022. Please save the date on your calendars at this point and look out for additional information as we draw closer to our annual meeting. We will be hosting our annual awards ceremony for those of you who are longtime veterans of COG. So what we'd love for you all to do is to take a moment and think about individuals and groups who are appropriate as nominees for consideration for these awards. You can RSVP for the annual meeting and nominate someone for the award starting right now by visiting the COG website and looking for annual meeting, or just by typing in at mwcog.org/annual meeting. We'll also have information on this sent out after the meeting if that's more convenient for you. And as always, if you have any questions, please contact the estimable Pat Warren for details. Big goings-on over the last couple of months concern the executive director search. Since we all last met in person at the board retreat, the executive director search committee has selected and has been actively working with a recruiting firm. On August 11th, the committee met with the recruiter to discuss the attributes most important for our executive director. Conversation that we had in Cambridge greatly informed that discussion, and I'm happy to report that it was a thorough conversation, and I am happy that there was a consensus among all of the committee members and clear direction given to the search firm. Now, the search committee also asked as part of that in addition to seeking our feedback and input, that the search firm also seek the input of the COG staff. So throughout the last month, several meetings were held with the recruiter where employees were invited to offer their thoughts on the skills and abilities desired in the next director. The committee also made sure to have those conversations with COG staff include not just the director level individuals, but people from throughout the organization, so there was a diverse cross-section of employees who were interviewed. And then last Thursday, the candidate profile was publicly released through a number of recruitment sites. I've sent an email to all of you alerting you to its presence. And that recruitment profile is found on the COG homepage that has a link to all materials relevant to the search. I encourage each of you to share the brochure with candidates and through networks where you think we can find interested candidates. That concludes my report. I'd now like to turn it over to Executive Director Chuck Bean for his report and agenda item number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the latter part of the summer into September, I had the opportunity to visit and speak to the City of Alexandria, Frederick County, Prince William County, City of Rockville. Focus was on Region United, and the core pillars of that are high-capacity transit station areas, equity emphasis areas, housing targets, and our climate goals. I'm happy to speak to other jurisdictions that would be interested in a similar presentation. On equity emphasis areas, we have an updated map. As part of our standard procedure, we have reanalyzed the region's 1,300 census tracts using 2020 census and American Community Survey data, and a new interactive map and data sets can be found via our homepage. Also on the homepage is a news link to our recent State of the Commute Survey results. The COG board received a preview of this at our July retreat, and I would say that this report is our most authoritative comparison of commute patterns, especially comparing pre-pandemic 2019 to 2022. Another topic, as a result of leadership from Virginia, Maryland, and the district, this board stood up a permanent committee devoted to regional food security and agriculture, the Farm Committee, which has now leveraged much bigger funding through FEMA to analyze the regional food supply chain. On the agriculture side, a number of officials did a tour of the Agriculture Reserve in Montgomery County, and I believe Mayor Stewart participated, if she would care to comment.
Hey, Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Our farm committee did get the opportunity on Friday to spend the day together touring the Ag Reserve, and I will say we only got to see a bit of it because the Ag Reserve is 1/3 of the land area in Montgomery County. So it takes quite a bit of time to visit it. We were able to visit 2 farms and 1 vineyard and have guest speakers talk to us about our farm to food bank programs and the opportunities and obstacles that face us as we address food insecurity and agricultural concerns in the region. I want to thank Lindsay Smith on the COG staff for working with County Council member Craig Rice, who co-chairs the committee, in putting together a terrific tour of the day. And if any colleagues in the future would like to join us in Montgomery County to tour the Ag Reserve, I'm sure we can set that up again. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, just as a reminder to the board, we had a robust discussion at the retreat and passed a resolution regarding support of migrants in our area. And this issue has been briefed out with our policy committees and technical committees, including CAOs, human service directors, emergency managers. I think the big push is to make sure that there's a federal presence, federal support for this effort in our region. So, Mr. Chairman, plenty of other things, growth in the return to office in the region, potential rail worker strike, a major water investment happening right now in Alexandria. Happy to answer any questions about what I've reported on or other COG programs.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Bean? Any comments in the room? Are there any coming from online? Mr. Snyder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. One of the discussions at the retreat was on violent crime, and I'm wondering if there are some next steps that we should consider. Thank you.
Mr. Bean, you want to start, and then I'll piggyback if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the items coming to the board within 2 months will be the crime report brought to this board by the police chiefs.
Absolutely. And conversations will be forthcoming soon with the executive committee as to any other takeaways and opportunities that were generated from our retreat conversation. So thank you for circling back to that. Any other questions for Mr. Bean? Any coming from online? Okay. With that, let's proceed with item number 4. And the original agenda that's sent to you has been slightly reordered due to the availability of one of our speakers. Nothing has changed in terms of substance, but the accurate agenda that we will be following this afternoon has been made available at your desk, and I do believe has been updated with the online board packet for those of you who are participating remotely. Are there any other amendments suggested, proposed for our agenda this afternoon? Seeing none, the agenda is approved and we will continue. Next, we will consider the minutes from our July 30th meeting. This was from the board meeting that was held in Cambridge, and so hopefully you've had a chance to review those. And then when you are ready, I would love to entertain a motion to approve those minutes from the July 30th board meeting.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
So moved by Ms. Gross and seconded by Mr. Allen. First, let's have any abstentions. Principally useful for those of you who were not able to join us at that meeting. Any abstentions? Hearing none. Are there any nay votes? Hearing none, the minutes are now hereby approved. We'll next move to consideration of our consent agenda. We are now on agenda item 6. We have 3 resolutions on our consent agenda today. You can review those on page 16 of your board packet. These resolutions, R36 through R38, 2022, concern topics related to enhanced mobility, water resiliency, and an update to COG's procurement policy, respectively.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
And that has now been moved by Ms. Gross to approve, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Are there any abstentions? Any nay votes? Our consent agenda is hereby approved. Motion passes. Now move to the next item, number 7, regional electric vehicle deployment. Today we will be joined by COG's Climate, Energy, and Air Programs Director, Jeff King, and joining him will be Executive Director Bean to continue discussions that we had robustly at the COG Leadership Retreat in July on regional electric vehicle deployment efforts. This is an action item, and after hearing the briefing, we will then consider Resolution R40, 2022, which endorses efforts to support electrical vehicle deployment. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Bean for the presentation.
Thank you. As background, this year, in March, COG staff proposed a number of potential initiatives for the COG board to support, to accelerate action on climate change. Some of the suggestions back in March were distilled out of our 2030 Climate, Energy, and Action Plan, about 3 dozen collective actions the region could take. Out of that discussion was the distillation of a focus on electric vehicles as the biggest near-term opportunity for the region, not just for the climate, but because of opportunities because of federal infrastructure funding. We held a special session at the COG board retreat to engage with you on what COG and the region could do to supercharge and get momentum on EV and infrastructure deployment. And there was consensus around supporting regional efforts, a regional approach on EV deployment planning. As part of the discussion, the board helped COG staff frame out areas of focus and items for consideration for today's COG board resolution. So here we are today to engage with you on this initiative and seek your support. And Jeff King, COG's Climate, Energy, and Air Programs Director, will share some updates and some specifics, and we look forward to your comments. Mr. King.
Thank you, Chuck. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be back before you talking about climate change and electric vehicles. We're really excited with your interest in accelerating deployment of EVs, and as you heard from Chuck, adoption of electric vehicles is really one of the highest impact measures we have to meet our aggressive 2030 climate goals. You should be aware COG staff does track adoption of both electric vehicles as well as the charging infrastructure across our region, and we continue to see growth and adoption of this technology, but as you're aware, still at a very early stage. And just to give you a sense of where we are, we have about 4 million vehicles on the roadway in our region. Currently, right now, we have a little under 200,000 hybrids and electric vehicles. Of those, less than 50,000 battery-only vehicles, but they're growing. I think you're probably aware the auto manufacturers have all indicated, very strong interest in going EVs, and I brought with me here a flyer that our Electric Vehicle Association of DC that puts out every year, which shows all the available models. And I tell you, this particular document is getting quite packed. There's a lot of cars available, and I think more are coming. So I think we have a really good opportunity here to get out in front and support the transition to these vehicles, and particularly looking at the infrastructure and the opportunity there. I think efforts in this area will really help us meet our climate goals, but it also will provide very significant air quality and potentially some equity benefits as well. Our COG Climate Energy team has been actively working with your member staff across the region on EV deployment planning. So I'd give you 3 key items to note. Over the summer, Chuck Bean sent out a letter to all the CAOs asking whether or not there would be interest in either funding or participating in an electric vehicle, regional deployment initiative, and we got a really good, robust response. So we have a lot of your member staff ready to work with us closely, and many of them already are, and that dialogue continues. We also have a number of active agreements with COG member governments specifically to do EV planning work, as well as some of the work we've been doing on climate planning. As part of that, in particular on the Prince George's County side, we did a big push in the summer to look at every census tract in the county and really start to look in at where the ideal or needed locations for EV charging. So that type of work continues. Our number of our local governments, DC, Arlington, Alexandria, are also in the process of either having just recently rolled out or about to roll out EV deployment roadmaps and plans. So we're seeing a lot of activity at the local level, and you're probably aware, with all the action in Congress and the White House, there's an array of ongoing and upcoming grant and funding program opportunities that some folks are already taking advantage of, but I think there'll be continued opportunity to look to those to help support the deployment of the infrastructure we need. In terms of the infrastructure, our 2030 climate plan indicates we probably need upwards of about 7,000 DC fast charging stations. Those are the types of charging stations that can charge your car, you know, in 10, 20 minutes. And right now we're probably a little over 200 in the region, but the pace is picking up. I just was on a call this morning. I think the PEPCO just got approval to roll out 8 more priority locations across the district for DC fast charging. And I know Dominion and PEPCO in Maryland and Virginia are also quite interested in this type of work. We have heard some concerns about supply chain, you know, issues related to transformers and the like, but I think on the Dominion side, they seem to be fairly optimistic that they can handle it. PEPCO perhaps has a different challenge, but so we'll need to look at that as well over time. Again, we think this is really an excellent time to coordinate some of these activities on electric vehicle deployment at the regional level. We have heard from both you at the retreat over the summer, as well as your staff, that there's a strong need for information sharing. Folks across the region are really keen on understanding and knowing what others are doing across the region. The other piece here, and I mentioned there's a number of local plans, but staff consistently note that mobility and travel go beyond our jurisdictional boundaries. So planning for a regional network of EV charging infrastructure is really desired. And again, with the federal government signaling its intent to significantly ramp up investment in EV infrastructure, I know there's a state-level initiative right now focused on the highway infrastructure, but there'll also be a number of rounds of community grants where they'll be providing funding to put in charging at the community level. So we see great potential in coordinating our planning for sure, but also potentially coordinating some efforts at coordinating the application efforts to see if we can secure some of that funding for the region. And I think ultimately one of the other pieces we'd like to look at is whether or not we can really achieve some economies of scale by working together. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for your leadership on climate change, and I hope we have your continued support for our regional EV deployment work activities. So I'll turn it back over to Chuck. Thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, we're happy to answer questions or engage in discussion with members. Thank you.
I anticipate we will do both. So thank you very much. But before we do so, we do have a resolution associated with this item, and to frame consideration of it, I'd like to turn it over to Vice Chair Stewart, who will offer comments and then introduce the resolution.
Great. Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you know what page the resolution is on in our packet? Because I'm not finding it.
It is on page 59 of our board packet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for that update, and I want to just frame this and say I am enthusiastically going to move the resolution today. This is a great example, Mr. King, as you just said, of regional collaboration. In the resolution, everyone will see that the resolve clause calls for 2 things. One, a clearinghouse, and the other is creating a regional working group. We heard loud and clear at our July meeting that it's important for us to be sharing information to create this regional network for electric vehicles for our residents. You know, we don't have residents who just live in Montgomery County or Tacoma Park and travel within our borders. They're traveling regionally for entertainment, for work, for doctor's appointments, and all those things. If we really want to have folks adopt electric vehicles, we need to build the infrastructure for that. And in order to do that, we need to support our local jurisdictions. And so I'm very glad that we have this teed up for us today, and thank you to my colleagues for the great discussion that we had in July that preceded this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stewart. Now I'd like to see if there is a second to that motion to adopt the resolution. Multiple seconds, but I'll acknowledge Ms. Briskman And now we'll move to a discussion of both the resolution and the broad topic. Supervisor Gross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is actually not on the resolution, but it's on the broader topic. This is all very positive and exciting and, you know, a goal that we have been working toward for quite some time, but I don't know if this is anecdotal or not, but it's my understanding that in California, where they have a number of electric vehicles, they also have a situation where sometimes they turn off the power grid to be able to avoid forest fires. When you turn off the power grid, you don't get anything flowing. So in an effort to do something good and save the environment, they're also not, they're creating a challenge for those who have electric vehicles. Again, I don't know if it's anecdotal, but I'm wondering if that kind of discussion has been held about, you know, in the future when we have a whole lot of vehicles that need to be charged and we have a grid problem or some sort of other natural kind of problem or a policy change that the power companies can turn off for several hours. How are we going to address that, or is that already in some sort of place where it's been discussed, or is it just sort of theoretical?
Very good point. And yes, there have been some discussions here at COG, at CEPC, our Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee. So we have engaged with Dominion and PEPCO. You know, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is, you know, separate than EVs, the climate issue is also active on the grid side, and there's been a lot of interest and activity on modernizing the grid and what types of investments need to happen there, everything from including microgrids and connection of large-scale solar. So I think that is definitely an issue that we need to keep our eyes on and work on. And, you know, the other piece of it, interestingly, is not so much the technology side, but the regulatory paradigm that governs the grid is 100+ years old and doesn't necessarily mesh with the markets of today. And I think there's, in the last month or two, 4 senators have sent a letter to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. There's a whole cadre of private sector entities that have signed on to an agreement to kind of push for changes that would better enable the business case for this type of these types of solutions. And it's going to be a heavy lift, but it's a good point.
Thank you very much. I'm glad there's some thought being given to it, and let others fight the battle, and we can just sort of latch onto it. But it is a concern that I hear from folks around the country. Thank you.
And if I may, one additional point just came to mind is in Montgomery County, interestingly, their EV charging for their public safety headquarters and their police fleet that have EVs is connected to a solar carport on property and powered with a microgrid. So there are some interesting solutions possible out there, even within our region. So.
Thank you. Vice Chair Allen.
Thank you. And Mr. King, good to see you again. And thanks. I feel like, I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but I learned so much more about battery capacity and charging at our July meeting. It was really helpful to have you and your team lay out just a fair amount of detail, but really helped us, I think, focus in on the regional urgency to having this type of coordination. And I'm glad that, as you said, we're not at the starting point. You've got a lot of partners and stakeholders that are already in that process. So I'm really glad that we're doing that. I'm very glad we're taking this step today. You know, as I was listening to Supervisor Gross's conversation as well, I was glad to hear your answer because while this goes beyond the scope of this resolution, I certainly hope that this also helps lay some groundwork for us regionally to be thinking about our grid when we think about that resiliency, sustainability, microgrids. I know we have looked at in certain parts of the district how we will build out and create that type of microgrid resiliency. Exactly to the supervisor's point, that if other policy decisions have to be made, how do we plan for and adapt to that type of impact? So, you know, again, that goes beyond the scope of this resolution, but I hope that it also helps maybe lay some groundwork for that type of regional partnership to think about those types of investments in our energy grid and what the future is going to look like for that type of resiliency that we're going to need. So enthusiastically going to be in support of this, and I really hope that it kind of paves the way for us to also start tackling regionally even more, because our solutions won't be found in each of our individual jurisdictions. It really will be regionally, and I'm proud that we're taking the step today. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Collins.
Yes, thank you. Scrolling down the resolution, I had to do a second read under the whereases to find the term, the plan facilitates an equitable transition towards zero-emission vehicles. The issue of equity, I think, is a primary issue of concern when we look at transitioning to electric vehicles. Just something as simple as the location of charging stations. That is a significant issue, and so, you know, I just want to ensure that, because I am certainly in support of the resolution, but I think the idea of equity, because, I mean, even being provided with this, there's only a handful of vehicles that I could say are affordable for me. So it's going to be a challenge for many of our residents, and I think all of us in this room are in total support. But, you know, we're dealing with something that does involve a degree of recognizing that equity is a key issue. So, but thank you.
Yeah.
Chairman, if I could respond.
Commissioner Collins, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Bean.
In our region, there are about 17 million trips that are taken every day, and we can map that. And thanks to the board's encouragement, our focus on equity emphasis areas, the 364 census tracts that have concentrations of low-income communities or communities of color. We can do that analysis and make sure that if there are disparities, we understand it and that we can address it. The price of the vehicles, at least in 2022, is a challenge. The location of the chargers is something that we can definitely focus on, and the board can hold us accountable to make sure that analysis is being conducted. And I think the equity emphasis areas is the tool to do that.
So before we leave this topic, I can just note that in our resolution, thank you for raising it, Mr. Collins, the resolve clause number 2, subsections 4 and 5 might be a great opportunity to reference the equity emphasis areas work, something along the lines of, in 4, developing white papers on deal structures for local governments to consider when working within the industry to build EV charging infrastructure, prioritizing equity emphasis areas, something along those lines. And then for number 5, developing model incentive programs for consideration by members to expedite EV purchase and or EV infrastructure installation, ensuring that equity emphasis areas are considered, something along those lines. If that's something that generally meets with, I think, the spirit of your remarks, we could look to insert those. All right, so why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm looking at head nods and I'm seeing general agreement. Is there anyone who disagrees? So we'll go ahead and tighten up that language to add to the resolution, and that will be in substance part of what we're considering today. Thank you. Supervisor Briskman and then Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, we just had a presentation at Finance Committee last night about our EV charging station program in Loudoun County and the electronic vehicles. First of all, Electrify America, who presented at our retreat, they're moving their lab to Loudoun County, but I went to tour their lab in Herndon, and it's phenomenal. So if you ever want to come to Loudoun County and tour their lab, I highly recommend it, and we can have lunch. But to Commissioner Collins' point, when we were looking at where we're putting EV charging stations in Loudoun County, county staff decided to use forward-facing county facilities. And if there was any more stark way to say which communities we are not investing in and which communities we are investing in, we had all of 6 opportunities for charging stations in Sterling, whereas other areas of the county, there were more than double the charging stations. So that's just a caveat to my colleagues here, that if you're relying on public-facing structures for these charging stations, you need to be really careful, because I saw that just in our initial plan, how inequitable that was. So I'm really glad that we're going to adjust that just a little bit. I would love for COG to be involved in our plans, because last night we were talking about being able to convert 23% of our fleet, and I just don't know if that's a good number or not a good number, and if it's really true that cruisers can't be electric. I understand maybe the heavier trucks and fire trucks and those sorts of things. And then they said if we replace all of the cars that we can, 23% by 2026, then we will reduce our tailpipe CO2 by 17 million pounds. And that sounds good to me, but I would love a gut check. Like, is that really doing what we need to do? And if not, do we need to push harder at the local level to make sure we have a larger percentage of our fleet? So just looking forward to that. And then lastly, with the concern about the cost of the cars, I'm really glad to have this chart, because one of my colleagues who's not really in favor of going this way wanted to say that the cost to the county for the cars was going to be $56,000 a car. And I'm looking at this, there's plenty that aren't that expensive. So my question is, after all of that, will the federal programs help localities purchase these vehicles in the same way that they're helping consumers purchase these vehicles? And or do we have a regional effort maybe so that Loudoun County is going to purchase 356 cars, maybe Fairfax County is going to purchase 700 cars, Montgomery County is going to purchase 1,200 probably, or 2,000 or 3,000, because that's Montgomery County. But can we all work together to bring down the cost for the counties? Thanks. And cities and other localities.
Yeah, a bunch of points there. So be aware we are under contract with ICF supporting Loudoun County on the energy plan update. So as part of that, hopefully we can help on your EV side as well. As part of the information sharing that we discussed and it's in the resolution, you know, for instance, Frederick County is actively engaged with COG and ICF as well on their government operations fleet plan. COG and ICF's also supported the government fleet operations plan for Prince George's County. You know, each time we engage, we are learning more, and we have information to share. So part of the work group will be just that. I think the other the piece you raise is the issue of fleets and cooperative purchasing. There have been, and this is probably a few years back, but there have been multiple very large funded efforts with multiple teams, including, you know, like the state of California, and it's been a tough nut to crack to do the cooperative procurement of vehicles, in part because the timing and choice and decisions are all, but it's, I think, something to keep looking at. I know the Houston-Galveston Area Commission, HGAC, has a buy. There's, and I'm blanking on the name, but we can probably push out some information on existing opportunities to do cooperative purchasing through the Purchasing Officers Committee, and we'll keep looking at it, but it's been tough. One thing to note is that typically within the governments, your largest fleets are public safety vehicles, and I think there'll need to be some efforts made over time to get with the police chiefs and those folks to convince them that the offerings from the auto manufacturers meets their need, because they have a particular need. I know from recent conversations there are active demonstrations, I think, happening very soon or just happened up in Michigan, where folks are looking at kind of the next generation of police pursuit vehicles that are all electric. So I think it's coming. The technology is advancing. I think it may become a situation where we need some folks to test the waters and demonstrate that it's not scary and can be done. And then over time, hopefully get the buy-in. And I think that government lead by example, where you know, your fleets are electric, you have the charging, you're showing the community that it's viable and makes good economic sense, good environmental sense. So.
Thank you. Very happy to support the resolution.
Thank you, Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Not to belabor the point, I really appreciate you suggesting to add that the equity piece into the resolution. I think that is very much appropriate and needed. And supporting this also, Jeff and I, you may or may not remember, when we were on the retreat, we briefly talked about just the touch points with our subject matter experts in our region and in our districts and regionally. and just making sure that they're in tune to the direction that we're taking and making sure that from them, the necessity and the respect of what we're trying to do is very much important and needed, as you related to the public safety entity as well, you know, because in the seasoned public safety experts, in their minds, they're thinking fuel, they're thinking heavy machinery, they're not transitioning. And so it would vote us to have either a presentation or some sort of touch point with those two entities to make sure that we're bringing them along with what COG is recommending.
Agree, and I'm keenly aware of some of the challenges, particularly on the resident side, of how to communicate some of these climate initiatives and get the buy-in, given all the other concerns folks have on their minds these days. And, you know, moving electric or addressing climate change isn't necessarily always the top of the list, but figuring out how to convey that message and get that engagement and buy-in.
Go to Mr. Elridge, and then Chair Wheeler, and then pick up anyone who's on the WebEx.
I'm not sure how many thousands of vehicles I'm going to be buying. Probably thousands. We did something different with school buses that I think is worth looking at. Instead of buying them straight up, did a bid and wound up working with a company because tax credits are worthless. Building, you know, somebody puts in the solar installation or sells you a vehicle with batteries, there's tons of tax credits embedded in it. The leasing company, if you know what you're negotiating and you realize what they're taking, you could actually negotiate better deals. That's what the school system was able to do. Basically, they're getting replacement buses for about the same price as electric buses, but it has massive savings in real plus for them. So we're looking at the same thing in principle. We want to do 1,000 cars in our police fleet. Somebody potentially to buy them, let them have the tax credits, and then you just get a reduced price on the vehicle. So I think if you know what you're doing, if you know what you're doing in terms of negotiating, you can do better. The best thing would be to advocate with our congressional representatives, let jurisdictions sell tax credits. Get the tax credits to be able to follow that we can do it in other, you know, with other things in the tax credit. We're not allowed to sell the credits that would be used. Also, we are working with the Mach-E is as fast as anything people have in their regular. Turning a generator or an alternator, which produces electricity for lights and computers when the car is not moving, so they have to beef up the onboard electricity so they can tap into that when the vehicle is stationary. But it's a solvable problem. And we've also now allowing people to use curbside power stations. So basically, sidewalk and pull a wire up on the other side, and so they can plug their cars into the street, because that's a big impediment if people don't have driveways along. And I've got a public right away with the street. Anybody who's interested, talk to our people who. But the trick is how to make it work. But
thank you. And, you know, with this clearinghouse, we won't all have to come and call on Montgomery County to find out what you're doing. This can all be part of the network that we're building up. So I think that's a perfect use case. Ms. Wheeler.
Real quick, I will say that the Mach-E goes really fast from 0 to 70. You can get there in like 2 seconds. It is a lot of torque, so I've tried that. But on a more serious note, just, you know, and I brought this up before, and it's not explicit, but when we're looking at doing, you know, the idea of being able to purchase fleets and fleet vehicles, you know, on a discounted basis, I still think that there's a barrier to change in a mindset because of the maintenance of the vehicles, and making sure that maybe having an option of maintaining or outsourcing that maintenance so people are more prone to be comfortable switching them over if they don't have the maintenance people on staff. it's just something to think about.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Schneider, I saw you at the very end, and then we'll go to people on the WebEx.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. So I think the TPB, when I chaired it like more than a decade ago, started talking about electric vehicles. So it's nice that we're finally here collectively. So thanks. Are we incentivizing and removing barriers for the private sector with this to encourage the private sector to move into the charging station area? Question number one. And question number two, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority asked me to make sure that they could be included in any working group. So thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and totally
Absolutely.
support the effort.
Appreciate it. And Mr. King, I don't know if you want to give a brief response there. I mean, I think part of our conversation in July was about that very engagement with the private sector, so I think that's definitely on your radar. I don't know if you want to address the NVTA piece.
You know, interesting, and you're right, and I think to the NVTA piece, Conti and I have already started some conversations about, you know, the composition of the work group, and you know, my sense is there are a number of different stakeholders like that are really important to be part of the conversation, whether or not we can set up a system where there's like a core group and then some other, you know, ways in which we pull in, you know, other interested parties like the Airports Authority or Ramada. We, for instance, are about to set up a call with Nina Albert, who was at the retreat with the GSA, who's the Public Buildings Commissioner, and, you know, we've got a lot of conversations going on with the military bases. So kind of how to, you know, set up the tent and who's there is kind of yet to be fully determined, but your input is welcome.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Parman, do we have anyone on the WebEx? All right, we'll conclude this item. I'm glad to hear such energy and great conversation on it. A couple of notes from me. One, Mr. King, as we're thinking about the working group, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to consider partners who may not usually be a part of our work, like, I'm just going to give an example, it's not exclusive, but the MITRE Corporation and federally funded research institution that I'm aware has been doing some tremendous work in looking at the industry of where these things are going, that can give us a sense of feasibility and future trends and being able to look forward instead of just looking at where we are right now, which is evocative of what Ms. Briskman talked about. A lot of people's awareness of where EVs are is based on something that they read yesterday, and we know that this stuff is rapidly changing, and making sure that that current information is always front and center for people is going to be very useful. And I'll close it out with that because I do want to move on with our agenda and not get too far behind. I'm sorry, yeah, we do need a vote, right? Yeah, guess we can't put that cart before the horse. We do have a resolution on the table to pass Resolution R40-2022. No more discussion, so all those in favor, say aye. 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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Resolution R40-2022 is passed. Thank you, Mr. King, Mr. Bean, and we look forward to this work kicking off. Next on our agenda, item number 8. While he is getting situated, we are going to welcome the new General Manager and CEO of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, WMATA, to introduce himself to all of us and to outline his priorities for his tenure. You don't need me to tell you that WMATA is essential to all of us. It is really, in the prosaic sense, part of the regional compact that we've all joined in for how we are to work together, provide transportation and mobility in our region. But more than that, it is essential to the mobility and freedom of people who live in the Washington metropolitan area. It's essential to all of our land use development programs that are part of our jurisdictions, ways to manage our particular area. It's part of our economic development strategies, both locally and regionally, and it's integral to our sustainability efforts as we think about the existential threat of climate change. And of course, COG has played an active role in trying to support WMATA, most particularly as Metro dealt with safety issues and doing what we could to forge the second regional compact to provide the Metro Rail Safety Commission, and the extensive work that was done through this organization to convene the necessary stakeholders that work to help secure permanent capital funding for Metro. So it's with that we are so thrilled to welcome the new GM and CEO of Ramada, Mr. Randy Clark. While he's been at Metro for only a little over a month, Mr. Clark has a long history of working in public transportation, having previously served as the president of CEO of Capital Metro in Austin, Texas, and before that at MBTA, the Metro System of Boston, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. So with that, we'd like to turn it over to Mr. Clark, who will provide us with his priorities and plans for Metro. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the welcome, and thank you, Chuck, for having me today. Hi, everyone. Randy Clark. Some of you I think I've had the chance to either have an email with. I look forward to getting a chance over the coming weeks, months, to get to know you all and the opportunity to work collaboratively with you. So, and for anyone that has reached out and I haven't got back to, definitely apologies. I won't lie to you, it has been kind of nonstop getting back to the region and the amount of people kind of coordinating with here. So, but Chair, you know, you did mention one of the things that I think you just mentioned was a little bit of, oh, looks like our Chair is here. Hello, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Would you like to lead off with a couple comments? No, I'll start. Okay, thank you. Yeah, one thing.
Clark, before you proceed, just to mention who is ascended to the table. So we also welcome the chair of the WMATA Board of Directors, Paul Smedberg.
Good afternoon, Christian. Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Well, as you know, Chair, as your previous role, you were a Metro Board as well. You started to talk a little bit about the criticality of Metro and how it kind of touches the entire region, brings the whole region together, and I couldn't agree more. In fact, I just left an event with Mayor Bowser and Amazon, and it was about the affordable housing in Ward 8. And Metro has actually now been working so collaboratively with Amazon and the different jurisdictional partners. I think that officially will be our 1,000th unit of affordable housing at a Metro station. So we play an important role for a lot of your overall policy goals. So, you know, COG is a great bringer together of policy thought leaders in the region, obviously. And you all, just in your conversation with electric vehicles, the electric vehicles is just a way to effectuate a policy. So you were talking about equity, you're talking about climate change. We're in that category. So you are not going to be successful on your economic development policy, your health and wellness policy, your environmental policy, and your affordability policy, and your equity goals without Metro performing well. So Metro performing well is in your best interest. You performing well is our best interest. We have certainly a symbiotic relationship. One thing I want to highlight right from the start is we want to be a great partner. And I think Metro has been a great partner, but from a personal point of view, I want to really start that off and say from a relationship point of view, if we have had areas where we could improve that partnership, we want to hear from that early and grow that and be the most collaborative thing. The public at large, they don't, what I've learned in public service, they don't care about any of the alphabet soup. They only want something done. Everything else is, people-made boundaries. So no one travels in one jurisdiction usually only, and no one, someone goes takes a kid to a soccer game in another jurisdiction or takes a job in another or goes to healthcare. They want us all to collectively work together and use their tax dollars for public good. And so you have our commitment that that's what we're going to lean into. The values of transit really do drive who I am as a person and why I'm really excited about this opportunity. I thank Chair Smedberg and the board for giving me this amazing opportunity. I have had some people say to me, I think they mean it in very good form, but why would you like this job? I first had to convince my wife why I wanted this job. But I wanted this opportunity because I believe in, not only do I believe in transit, we love this region. So my wife and I are very happy to be back to this region. Quite frankly, we kind of would like to maybe live here the rest of our lives. We've lived here before. It's an incredible region. You all know that's why you live here. But it's also, Metro has to do well for this region to thrive. And this is a thriving region. This is not a stagnant region. This is a thriving region. And I want to be part of that for the future. And that's why I'm here, and I really appreciate the chairs and his colleagues for giving me the opportunity. Metro has a lot of talent. I've really been just really satisfied and happy to see all the great WMATA talent we have. Now, that's not to say we don't have problems at Metro. right? We have 12,000 plus employees and staff and lots of contractors, and we are doing a lot of good things every day. Now, it has been a hard slog for Metro from a perception point of view over the last, better part of a year. There's no getting around that. COVID has impacted all of you from your jurisdictional work. COVID, I think, did a real number on Metro a lot because of the type of organization it is. So we have to kind of get past the COVID pandemic and re-energize our organization to be that collaborative, both internally collaborating and externally collaborating to deliver excellent customer service. That is where I'm going to be laser focused every day. The customer service is critical. We need to reduce the drama of Metro, both drama externally and drama internally. Everyone should be able to count on safe, frequent, reliable transit. I will know we're successful when the chair and I kind of say, hey, no one's talking about us right now. That's what we're aiming for. The most boring kind of organization from that point of view, because boring means we're very, very effective. And we want to be there for the residents and the visitors of this region to know they can count on us. So that's clean stations and buses. It's great customer service from our employees. They have to feel safe coming to work, and we have to make people feel safe using the system. And safe is both, from a system safety, if you will, rail and bus vehicles, but also the feeling in the station related to crime and order. We also have to deliver frequency, and that is something we're starting to, I think, deliver a little bit more on, and the overall experience of how we engage a customer. So, we've already started to do that. I hope in the last month, people have actually seen a little bit of we're going in the right direction. We're into a massive cleaning program. We're redeploying a lot of our security and police officers for more visibility around the system. We brought more 7Ks back, our 7000 series trains, which are much more reliable and a much safer vehicle. And we brought a lot of those back starting this week. And we've actually reduced our headways, or if you want to say the other way, increased our frequency on a lot of our lines. We're working collaboratively with the WMSC, Safety Oversight Authority, to bring even more of those back. So we're moving that in the right direction. Unfortunately, we do have a little bus challenges right now with hiring on our bus operator side, but we're aggressively hiring, and we want to get back into full bus service, especially on a lot of our most important corridors that people are highly transit dependent. So we're kind of focused on a lot of those things. One thing I'm really going to concentrate, you talked to me, Chair, about priorities. As the leader of the organization, of the staff, one of the things I want to really lean on is a culture of continuous improvement. And the only way you can have a culture of continuous improvement is when you admit when things are wrong. It's really healthy. Sunshine is good for the soul, I think. I'm sure someone said it much more poetically than that. But there's a lot of truth to that. And I think one of the things, and I appreciate the chair and the board's support on this, we want to become a little bit more transparent of an organization. And I think that transparency is going to be really good for Metro, and it's good for the region. Because at the end of the day, it's the public's money. And one of the campaigns that we're really going to highlight the whole thing is, it's your Metro. We have the privilege of operating the system on the community's behalf. It's your Metro. So an employee, it's your Metro. From an ownership, I expect the employees to own their job. We want the decision-making as low as we can in the organization, and then to own and be empowered to make decisions and deliver for the community. We want the community, and therefore all of you as elected officials and stakeholders, to feel it's your system, because it is. And all of us together need to make Metro successful. And we're going to work really hard on that. So, when I first got here, we had a tunnel fire. And we immediately put out pictures, and we said, here's what happened, and you're going to see that from us. People know there was a tunnel fire. There was no trains going through the red line. We didn't have to worry about telling what was going on. People knew what was going on. But I think it's really important that we lean into that. We're going to lean into much more performance dashboards to really people could see how we are performing on their behalf. And I'm really excited about that. So a couple other things we're going to work on is, again, our customer communication. Someone should be able to call us, tweet us, you name it, and we are responsive to what they need. We're not a business. We'll never be a business. We're not supposed to be a business, but we're going to be as business-like as possible. And I use the term customers, and I do not use the term riders, and I do that very specifically. If you took a flight out of a national airport today on American Airlines, no one is going to call you a flyer. They're going to call you a customer because they have to earn your trust to have your business. And I don't care if it's a $1,000 ticket or it's a kid riding for free through a DC public school system. We have to provide an environment that people want to be on our system. That's what we're after and what we're going to be focused on. I know a couple things you're really focused on, and then, I offer the chair if you'd like to make any remarks, and then, I'd love to hear any thoughts from you, and really, this is the start of a really big partnership and an open collaborative process. I know the FY24 budget is obviously something that everyone will be thinking about. So the challenge we have at Metro is we don't have our own independent funding, as you all know. So Metro, at the end of the day, has a jurisdictional framework. So some people have said it probably the best. And maybe, Chair, I guess you were alluding to this thought. The compact is both the greatest and worst thing at Metro. The compact is great because it unites us all together. It's bad because it was designed in 1967 without really thinking about how this region would be today. But those are the rules, and those are how we're going to all work together and move forward. So FY24 budget, it's not going to be easy to close the budget, and we're going to have a budget meeting. We're going to be doing some budget work with the board next Thursday. But we do believe we probably have enough internal tools here at Metro to work with the board to close next year. Again, not going to be easy, but we do believe we have tools to do that. After FY24, we are going to have to reset the quote-unquote business model of Metro. It's not sustainable, and therefore to you all, it's not predictable. And both of those things are super important. So one of the things that I think, the chair and I have had a lot of conversations, and some other thought leaders on the region is, in so many ways, Metro for a long time has been, here's what jurisdictions have available to pay, and that's what Metro is. And one of the things I think this is the chance post-pandemic to do differently, and a lot of regions around the country would do this differently because, again, usually based on funding source. What do we want Metro to be? And then let's figure out how to fund that. That is, some ways, some people think that's the same thing. It's two different versions of the same thing. So instead of, let's say we have $3 and what do you do? Let's figure out what we all want Metro to be. And some of that might be, okay, here's what we can fund now, and here's what we want to fund aspirationally. But let's really double down as a region and say, what do we want this amazing $100 billion and growing asset to be for the next 3, 4, 5 generations that use this region and make it successful? And that's where we're going to be focused. The last piece, then, Chair, if you would like to make any remarks. To do that, we're going to be focused on what we're calling a strategic transformation plan. So a lot of you have gone through strategic planning efforts. We have no interest in doing a strategic plan that's, the size, looks like a legal book from 1840 that sits on a shelf. We want a flexible, dynamic document that anyone from the board to a bus operator can understand how he or she fits in this great organization and delivers for the organization. It's also really important that, therefore, all of you as stakeholders, some of which are quote-unquote funders or not, or even if you will, non-government partners, can all see then what our roadmap of Metro is. We can't have 20 priorities, because that means we have no priorities. We have to get down to say, what are our core goals? What are we trying to accomplish that unites the region? And then we are going to go target that. I expect the board will then hold me accountable to deliver that. I will hold my management team accountable to deliver that, and we'll do that all through the organization. Everyone's linked together. We might honestly end up with an 11 by 17 color foldout that actually is our strategic plan framework with a small document that explains how we actually go about using that and the transparency and the board process to go through the reporting and the KPIs and how that all works. We want to make it easy so everyone, no matter who you are, can understand what we want Metro to be. So we're excited to do that. Again, I'm here. I thank you for your warm welcome. This region has, it's just been nonstop for the last 6, 7 weeks of people just being so gracious. And I know how important Metro is. You have my personal commitment. I'm going to, everything I got every day to make this organization work in a great collaborative way. And we're here to bring the pride back of Metro, because I know you all have the pride of Metro being great for all of your jurisdictions and outcomes. So with that, Chair, I welcome any.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and nice to see so many familiar faces. I think you can see pretty easily why we chose Randy. And we thought it was really important to bring someone in from the outside to really bring a critical eye and on the organization. And I think we've already seen that in 6 very short weeks. The board and Randy and staff is very excited about the transformation process that we're starting now. It's going to be extremely strategic. We had a really good session last week. And basically, as I don't know, Randy, what you said initially, but, you know, as I've told Randy and we've talked about, everything is on the table. I mean, Metro has got to reform. It's got to change. Not only the financial model ultimately, but, you know, again, what is Metro internally going to look like, you know, several years from now? And how is it best going to serve this region? So we're very excited. I think it's a real great opportunity for Metro. And so look forward to your comments and questions. And good seeing you, Christian.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smedberg. So as we begin our discussion, if you'll indulge me, I will invert my usual way of doing business and ask the first question or make the first comment. So welcome to both of you. And, you know, as someone who has a history of serving on the Ramada board, but is also a regular, as you would like to call it, customer, Mr. Clark, you know, I'll note that Metro is in this unique position of needing to serve those customers, those who make the daily choice whether or not they're going to use the system, but also, in turn, the jurisdictions that they reside in who serve as their proxy customer when it comes to maybe fulfilling some of the aspirational objectives that may be a part of your business model review. So the question is, in terms of just sequencing and timing, do you think that coming to the region next year with perhaps a business model that asks customers, whether they be funding jurisdictions or riders themselves, to do more, will be well received, given that many people have not had the experience of having seen Metro thrive, you know, because of the pandemic, because of, you know, issues with safety before that, because of turnover in our region. It's, as some of my family would say, it's been a minute before people have experienced Metro at its highest level, and with that, probably a degree of skepticism. And so I'm just wondering about the timing of maybe an aspirational ask without a kind of continued track record or showing people what it looks like when Metro is in fact thriving.
Yeah, Chair, I think that is a great point. So maybe I'll give a little finer point, at least. I think the sequencing we're thinking of. FY24, our goal is to figure out internally how to close that gap. But to the Chair's point, there might be different things we put on the table. So we're going to have a big, robust conversation about fare policy. We have a significant challenge around fare policy. We have people in the region that want transit to be free, and we have lots of people in the region that say it has to be really fee-driven. We have maybe arguably the most complicated fare table in transit in the world that is pretty outdated, and it's not easy to use, and it's and maybe not as equitable based in a variety of ways you might slice equity on that way. So I think it's very clear to me, and I think the board would, you know, but for the chair, he would answer this, is we need to perform better before we are asking anyone for fundamental funding changes. That's why I'm focused on the bread and butter topics. So we need to run safe, frequent, reliable service. And when we get that cooking, then at that point, you know, we have, I think, a framework and trust and credibility in the community to have a larger conversation. So we have things on the table that are for this year, but what I was trying to really state is after this year is over, we are going to have to come to a realization as a region that there will not be a lot of tools in our toolbox. So you all have different tools than we currently have, and us as a region will have to solve the longer-term question. But I think the first piece is us gaining trust and credibility. And one of the things I'm hoping to do that is I think you have to show contrition when you're wrong. And maybe as an organization, we haven't done as much of that as some people feel. And number two, that transparency element of just kind of opening it up and saying it's the public's, and here's where we truly are. I think if we can do that, and while we perform service, ridership, by the way, is growing. Ridership, I think last week was about 9 or 10% higher than the week before. We're going to be putting some stuff out relatively soon, but I mean, it is really starting to come back, which is really positive. If I can, I want to put a little fine point on safety, not to take too long, but I think this is really a critical point. This is a safe system. It's a very safe system. I use the system every day. I've had 3 train trips already today. There'll be another one right after this, and I have a bus trip later, and then another train ride. So it's like, maybe I'm just doing the ridership right now that I think about it, but but this is a safe system. And I've said this probably before. My wife is on the system. I would never be involved in the transit system that I did not think was safe. But I want to be clear about language around safety. We are going to build an entire culture around the idea that it's either safe or we do not do it. That is safety. We're not going to create a binary choice between, you know, is it safe first or that or that. It's either safe or we're not doing it, and I want people empowered about that. The 7,000 fleet, 7,000 fleet, there's a really fine point on that I think it's really important publicly we start talking about this a lot more. That fleet has run over 400 million miles safely, and we had one incident. And I do not want to downplay that incident. That was a significant incident, and it's being investigated by the NTSB, us, and the WMSC. But we run a very safe system. So if you hear someone say, a wheel fell off a train, that did not happen, right? So there's a lot on Twitter about Metro and safety, and then there's the reality. And I think one thing we have to do is be a little more fact-driven about what is really happening. So if you took the amount of measurements we've done with no actual change in wheel migration on the 7,000 fleet, that'd be equivalent of driving around the Beltway 29,000 times without a failure. We've lost over 1,000 people in the DMV on our roadways in the last year. Metro is a safe system, and the more service we run, the safer the community we have is. And I just think that's really important that we ground people of how safe transit truly is.
All right.
And Mr. Chair,
other discussion from Mr. Smedberg.
Yeah, Mr.
Sure.
Chair, if I could, one other thing I want to put on the table as well, in addition to, you know, financial model, fair policy, we've got to see how this region and how our customers are going to be using the system in the future. I mean, as you all know, the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 commuter, which has been the bread and butter, is gone. We're seeing a lot of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We have $2 flat fares now on the weekend. Weekend ridership is up. The district has seen a lot of growth in younger people and younger families, as have Arlington, Alexandria, and parts of Montgomery County. They're not necessarily going to the core anymore. They're heading out to Ballston, Tysons, out toward the Silver Line and Reston, Greenbelt. So how the people are going to use the system in the future, I think, is also something that we've got to really pay attention to as we look at all these other things happening.
All right. Can I just get a show of hands broadly so I can get a little cue? So Mr. Lusk, Vice Chair Allen, Supervisor Bailey, Mr. Elrich. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll say I appreciate the focus and the comments that you made specifically about customer service and this point on reliability and really about transparency. So thank you for the way that you teed up what you're going to be focused on and what you're going to do. When I think about Metro, and it's kind of interesting, I worked in economic development before I became a member of the board, and I see Metro as such an important driver for our economy here locally, and we think about all the things in Fairfax County where I serve, and the Franconia-Springfield Metro is in my district, and we think about all the development and the planning work that's been done around the Metro locations. You have to succeed. We've made significant investments, obviously, in Metro, but the developers and the community has such an interest in seeing the success. So I guess the thing that we have to figure out, to the point you made just a second ago, is how do we communicate to our customers, our residents, the performance of Metro, the things that are going well with Metro. We need to help you do that. And I want to commit in my district that I want to share what's happening with regard to the system, because I think there is a perception, and that perception is wrong. So we've got to work against it. So I guess the question is, how can we support and help you in communicating and sharing information about the things that are going well at Metro as well?
Well, thank you for that comment and your willingness to be a partner on that. So I think, it's twofold. One is there are a lot of good things going on, and I would say then we have to figure out ways that we are more organized. And I know our staff works really closely with all the jurisdictional staff, but ways that maybe we can enhance that so we can really get information sharing going. I also want to figure out how we can actually have you all be on the system more and see your system. So again, when you say our success, I'm going to keep going back to it's our success. And so, you know, I would love, we were at, I know Mayor Wilson was out on Monday doing pieces the other day. Chair Crystal was out with the chair and I helping people on shuttle bus customers on Monday. We want you all to be out part of the system. And so that would be one component of it. And then we also got to be, I think, leaning into that transparency, because things will happen in life, right? We are a human-run organization, and one thing I think we have to ground everyone on is every organization you've ever done anything with, whether you stopped to get a coffee at a coffee shop, to interacted with Metro, to your public or private worlds, humans sometimes make mistakes. So we are never going to be risk-free. How do we manage those risks appropriately and then communicate those things? So I think we have to be probably a little bit more leaning into acknowledging when things are a problem, and especially earlier. You know, bad news doesn't get better with time, and then work with you as a jurisdictional partner so you're not caught off guard and we can kind of collaborate, because at the end of the day, again, your constituent is our customer, and they just want to kind of have that information. Chair, I know you have some information, you say it better than me, about the volume of people around metro stations and all the development.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Commissioner Lusky, I mean, you know full well, all, you know, Metro is the economic lifeblood of this region. It is. You still look at all the major development, it's still within a quarter mile of stations. It's pretty much true across the region. In terms of communication, I mean, the board, I know, really likes what we're seeing coming out of Metro now, being much more proactive instead of reactive. And you know, we're both the NBTC members. You know, having a group like NBTC on the Virginia side, I think, has been really, really helpful in help crafting messages, getting the word out. We need to do more of that as a region, and have places like, you know, COG and you know, people around this table from the different jurisdictions having similar messages and everything. And I think hopefully, you know, we, WMATA, can help contribute to that by having, you know, good, clear communications, proactive communications, you know, getting out there, because it is definitely going to be needed, you know, for the future. But you are right. Every meeting that Randy and I have had, or that I've had calls from during the recruitment process from the governors and others, you know, everyone is committed to Metro. They understand the value of Metro, and they are not going to walk away from the investment that they have put in Metro. And they know it's important that Metro succeed for the future of this region. It just is.
Thank you. Vice Chair Allen.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, I think you're off to a phenomenal start. I think it's really important for not just for the district, but for the whole region. I view public transit as a public good, but your point about earning the trust of customers is spot on. You know, and as my family as riders, you know, being able just to transparently talk about what's happening, but know what our options are. This morning, my wife was headed to the red line at Union Station. There was a problem there. She pivoted and took the X9, get in. And so knowing to have confidence in those options is important. But I think you're off to a great start, and I think you are breathing that freshness into WMATA in the way that I think your customers, both the ones you have and the one you got to get back, can see that. So I just really appreciate that. Folks love to beat up on WMATA. Twitter is not real life. So being able to bring that truth forward and then be able to get that trust and confidence is spot on. Everyone wants to see you succeed. Everyone. So at least consider me to be one of those voices that is saying, don't wait too long to come to us and tell us what you need. So I totally understand you're going to try to figure out and close that FY24 piece and kind of once you get things going. But my advice would be don't wait too long, because I think everybody here is invested in your success, is rooting for you, wants to see you succeed. And so I think most of us have been over backwards to help get what you need to make that system work and what you need. So please do that. One question I had is oftentimes I think when we talk about our system, maybe unintentionally, but oftentimes rail and bus ends up getting pitted against each other in some ways. I think when we look at what our pandemic caused and what our recovery looks like, our rail ridership dropped dramatically and is slowly coming back, but our bus ridership dropped much less so and has come back much better. As you think about the challenges ahead, how are you kind of thinking about that rail and bus recovery in a way that doesn't sacrifice one over the other, but recognizes we've got to do right by both those?
Yeah, well, great question, and thank you for your early comments. I appreciate it. Look forward to collaboratively working with you over the position. So I think there's first of all, there's a deep underlying inequitable aspect about transportation in American history based on rail and bus. There's no getting around that. That's factually driven. Take that out of the equation. Metro, I think, has contributed to a disconnect between rail and bus because internally we kind of almost operate as, in some ways, two entities put into Metro. And one of the things that I have many faults in life, but one of the things I pride myself in my career is I really want to break down silos. And we need to be looked at, I'm trying to build a whole staff capacity around enterprise thinking. Every part of the organization has interdependencies with another part. And so I really fundamentally believe a bus customer and a rail customer are equal, right? Doesn't matter how much your fare is, we have to provide a great service for you. And there's this economy, yes, while the metro rail system is probably seen as more the economic driver in a lot of development, the actual workers that fuel this economy, that are all the people that, when you stop to get a coffee coming in here today, majority of them are actually taking a bus trip. And if they're not a metro, they're taking a regional bus trip. So our bus network redesign project that we're just kicking off next month, quite frankly, is incredibly important. We are a little behind as a region on that. Lots of regions have actually moved that forward, so we're going to try to move that pretty aggressively. We need your partnership. You know, in the city, it's with the circulator, but all the regions. So far, staff tells me all the staffs are working great on that together. We need to build a regional bus network, and I say network importantly because that doesn't mean it has to be all metro, but the network has to work seamlessly together, and it should be easy on fares and signage and stops and timing and all of those things. But all of us have to come together and give up our little bit of, well, that's mine versus that's yours, and just say, what do the customers want and what serves that part of the community? So that's where we're going to be focused. So internally, we are one agency, one metro, and there's nothing that's more important than the other. And externally, I think this network redesign. I also would highly encourage you all, the more transit supportive infrastructure you can deploy, not only helps those customers, and not just deploy with a sense of urgency. Because, you know, take the 16th Street corridor, you kind of maybe that kind of corridor. We are moving a disproportionate amount of people in that corridor that are lower income or people of color, or a term we've been really highlighting the last couple of years, society, essential workers. And so for every hour that those buses can't move at a speed and reliability in a safe way, impacts those people's lives. And those people's lives have less free time proportionally than most other people, actually. And so, you know, they got to get to daycare, they got to get to their job, et cetera, et cetera. So that sense of urgency around transit signal priority, bus-only lanes, working with Metro on trying to do that is not only good for our customers, it's actually going to be great for your ROI as a jurisdictional partner, because every hour of service costs money. And if I can take a route with 12 buses and make that same service 10, that's cheaper to run. Or that 12 buses actually goes from being a 15-minute headway to a 12 or 10-minute headway, and we serve even more people and get more people out of their cars. So we have back to that, we're integrated on our policy goals, and so thank you, Councilmember. Hope that answers your question.
All right, Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. You are, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Allen, you are in your element. We are glad that you are here. And you look great on camera, on TV when you're solving problems too. So we appreciate that too, your leadership as well. And I think that you are very much astute when you talk about customer service and how important that is to our region. It really is. I was talking to my colleague Julie here, and we've never lost our confidence in Metro. So we need to say that to you up front and to let you know that it is, we feel that it is a very safe transportation element in our community, and we appreciate that. I think you're in a season of an opportunity to review what's going on, revamp, and tweak that which is kind of lost a little bit. and to accelerate that which can be done in the future. And so I want to invite you not to forget to look at the southern corridor as you're working in partnership with other transportation partnerships going towards Prince William County, just putting a plug in. And to say that when I think about our metro, I kind of compare it to the New York, transportation thing. It's so old, but ours is still kind of in the baby stage. And I think that we need it in our region in its entirety. And so I would invite you to really look at what that means, going back to something Mr. Allen said, look at what that means in terms of how do we expand it and make it even better, and making the partnerships and the relationships even better and different. So I just want to put that at your feet for a minute and to let you know that your energy and what you're saying to us, that you want to be here, that means something. That means something, because we could have someone that, it's just a job, but you want to be here and you're using the tool that you're trying to enhance. So just laying that at your feet, and thank you for being committed to our region.
Thank you. And I'm going to let that comment land on its own, because I know you have a time schedule that required a little shift in the agenda. We still have to recognize Mr. Elrich, and then we'll see if there's anyone on the WebEx who wants to get one in.
I'll join everybody else in thanking you for your presentation and the kind of breath of fresh air you bring to this. This is really important. I'll also say that, for whatever problems Metro has had, I think at the end of the day, it comes from being underfunded, which we all know. It's not been properly funded probably for decades. And it's always been a challenge to have ratepayers through the users pay for it, because of what that cost would have been. So when you're reevaluating things going forward, I'd ask you to take one more look at the concept of special taxing districts around metro stations. We created all this massive wealth. We took property that had minimal value, low-rise buildings, and we turned it into massive buildings with massive value. And Metro didn't capture a dime of that wealth. And it seems to me that going forward, I don't think you're going to find an easy path to revenue. Everyone's going to have somebody who's going to be unhappy. But I think it'd be worth taking a look at, what is the value around metro stations? What could you yield? What's the smallest tax that you could impose that would have a meaningful yield and offer, an ability to change your trajectory? And there may be other things you want to do as well. But I think, I know there was a discussion about this at the inception of Metro. Other forces prevailed. But, if we're thinking about how we go forward for the next 50 years, 100 years, maybe we think about, is there a better way to fund this for everybody who benefits? That includes people who benefit in land value, contribute to the... But my main comment, the other thing is I look forward to working with you. You have bus routes that overlap with our stuff. We're going to be implementing rapid transit. I'm agnostic about vehicles running some of the infrastructure we're going to build. The facilities, you've got buses. I don't need to own it and place you. There may be ways where we can consolidate what we're running, but run it more efficiently. I look forward to working with you on forward in the county.
I will not ask you to comment as to whether or not you're endorsing the principle of levying a tax in jurisdictions at this time. I know you want to take that under due diligence, so I'll alleviate you of that burden of feeling like you need to respond. And we'll see if there's anyone on the WebEx who may have a question for Mr. Clark or Mr. Smedberg. All right. Hearing none. Thank you both, Randy and Paul. We very much appreciate your joining us this afternoon. This will be the first of what I hope are a number of fruitful discussions, and hopefully none of them are with the sense of urgency that have sometimes characterized regional meetings around Metro, but we look forward to partnership to help realize your vision and to support the work of Ramada and the board in really serving the vital role for our region that it does. So thanks a lot. We very much appreciate it. We'll now have a little bit of a set change as we move to item number 9 on our agenda. And this concerns efforts to increase water supply resilience in the Washington metropolitan region. So as we present this agenda item, we're going to hear from several of our region's water leaders on the collaborative efforts involving utilities as well as local governments to improve resiliency of the region's water supply. We are joined by Fairfax Water's General Manager, Jamie Bain-Hedges, who will be followed by WSSC's Water Planning Division Leader, Tom Hilton, and DC Water Government Affairs and Public Policy Director, Apera Nwora, along with Arlington County's Department of Environmental Services Director, Greg Emanuel. All of them, we look forward to the briefing this afternoon. According to my agenda, Ms. Hedges is due to start. So at this point, if the PowerPoint's ready, and I think it is, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleagues and I really appreciate the opportunity to brief the COG board this afternoon on the region's water supply and on our collective past efforts to enhance water system resiliency, as well as the present effort to authorize and fund a study of a secondary water source for the region. Collectively, the region's utilities provide domestic water service and fire protection to over 5 million residents and 3 million employees in the Washington metro area. The Potomac River alone supplies nearly 80% of that water. Because of our collective reliance on the Potomac, for over 40 years, the region's major water utilities have coordinated our water supply planning and system operations. Through a series of agreements and commitment of significant financial resources by the utilities and by extension our customers, these efforts have resulted in the development of additional water supplies to reinforce the metro region's system. A number of historic events have led to the system that we have today in the DC area. Kind of started in the 1850s following a major fire at the Library of Congress, after which Congress directed the Army Corps of Engineers to construct a public water supply system to serve the District of Columbia. With that effort, the Washington Aqueduct was born, intakes on the Potomac were installed, and today the Washington Aqueduct Division of the Corps continues to fulfill the mission of supplying water to the district through DC Water, and they also supply drinking water to Arlington County and to Fairfax Water for portions of service to our system. Then in the mid-60s, the Potomac experienced its historic low flows. At the same time, there was increasing demand for water in the region to supply growing populations in Virginia and Maryland. Fairfax Water and WSSC at that time were both planning water supply intakes on the Potomac to meet that need. The Washington Aqueduct, as the furthest downstream intake, would potentially not have had enough water to meet its critical mission during periods of low flows in the Potomac. And it became clear to our collective predecessors that that was not a tenable situation. As a stopgap measure, the Low Flow Allocation Agreement was established in 1978 to allocate Potomac River water in the event there was insufficient supply to the metro region and the 3 major utilities, Fairfax Water, WSSC Water, and the Washington Aqueduct. But as you know, economic development and quality of life depend on a resilient water supply. So to avoid an allocation situation, the 3 major utilities entered into the Water Supply Coordination Agreement in 1982, which provided for the coordinated construction of additional water storage, future water supply planning, and system operations during periods of low flows. The utilities have been supported over the last 40 years in these critical functions by the staff of the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, who provide unparalleled technical support in our planning and operational efforts. This graphic gives you an outline of the Potomac watershed. The green outlined area is Potomac watershed. You can see circled in blue the Potomac water intakes for all three of the major utilities. You can also see the general location of the upstream Potomac reservoirs, the Jennings-Randolph and Savage reservoirs, which were part of those 1982 agreements, as well as the Little Seneca Reservoir, which is located in Montgomery County and a little bit closer to the district. So those are the reservoirs that were paid for and continue to be maintained by the three major utilities through the Water Supply Coordination Agreement. In addition, on this map, you can see what we call the off-Potomac storage. The Occoquan Reservoir, which is a supply for the Fairfax water system, and the Patuxent Reservoirs, which is a supply for the WSSC water system. The service areas for the utilities are highlighted here in green, WSSC water serving Prince George's and Montgomery counties. The Washington Aqueduct, a little hard to see, the yellow color, serving the district and Arlington County, as well as portions of Fairfax. And in the pink, the Fairfax water system, which provides water to the counties of Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William, as well as the cities of Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax, the town of Herndon, and the town of Vienna. As I mentioned earlier, the Potomac supplies nearly 80% of the region's water. And while the aqueduct and its customers have access to the shared Potomac storage, they do not have off-Potomac storage similar to the Occoquan and the Patuxent. And as a result, the district and Arlington County are 100% reliant on the Potomac for their supply through the aqueduct. The three major utilities, WSSC, the Aqueduct, and Fairfax Water, funded the construction and the ongoing operation and maintenance of the upstream Potomac reservoirs. Releases made from those reservoirs during low Potomac flows benefit the Potomac from the headwaters all the way to DC. They benefit not only the three major utilities, but other water suppliers along that path, as well as providing additional flows for the natural environment. Through our coordinated water supply planning, supported by the ICPRB staff, we know that additional supplies will be needed to address extreme climate change scenarios and to provide resilience against spill-type events in the Potomac. The existing agreements amongst the three suppliers, developed in the late 70s and 1980s, did not anticipate climate change impacts or protection of the Potomac supply from spill events. Development of new water supplies to address these issues will be extremely capital intensive and require a new regional cost sharing and operational framework. This is a schematic of how the region's water systems that rely on the Potomac are kind of interrelated. We're pretty much like a big family, all supplied by the Potomac. In the black outlined white boxes are all of the utilities that have intakes on the Potomac. So in addition to the three major suppliers that I've mentioned previously, both the town of Leesburg, the city of Rockville, Loudoun Water, and Frederick County also have withdrawals on the Potomac. As I mentioned earlier, the Washington Aqueduct provides wholesale service to Arlington County and DC Water. Fairfax Water provides wholesale service to neighboring jurisdictions. And then WSSC Water also has emergency interconnection capabilities with Howard County and Charles County as well. Our region has a very long history of coming together to invest in and protect our water supply infrastructure. These include efforts to address insufficient flows through the LFAA, developing resources and cooperative planning through the WSCA, the Regional Drought Response Plan that was developed through COG, resiliency studies, and other initiatives. We have a solid foundation to build upon, but it will require the additional efforts of federal, state, and local partners working with the utilities to ensure the resilience of the regional water supply against future challenges. Next, I'd like to introduce Tom Hilton, the planning group leader for WSSC Water, who will be continuing the presentation.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you.
I'd like to start out by noting that all utilities need to plan for emergencies and develop contingency plans and develop alternate means and methods on how they will provide an uninterruptible source of potable water to its residential, commercial, and governmental customers. And as you know, clean, potable water is essential for human consumption, for hygiene, for business and governmental operations, and for fire protection. Any surface water supply can be impacted by drought and spills, and this is particularly true with the Potomac River. The watershed upstream of the water utilities intakes encompasses approximately 12,000 square miles. Not having an adequate quantity or quality of water for treatment and delivery to our customers would have consequences for all of the water utilities in the region. And this perhaps is more of a higher concern for the Washington Aqueduct. As previously noted, it does not have a supplemental water source, unlike WSSC water and Fairfax water. And as a result, you will see in our presentation, there is a need for an additional water supply to accommodate the entire region's needs. So historically, there have been a number of spill events. 1993, the Colonial Pipeline, which crosses the river, ruptured, releasing significant amounts of oil into the river. 2015, there was a release of latex from the Luke paper mill. 2016, there was a small but continuous release of oil from a turbine at the Dickerson Power Generating Station. 2018, there was a discharge from a research facility located in Frederick County. And in 2021, there were 3 incidents, but they were considered minor in nature. And unlike a drought that you can see coming for weeks or months in advance, we have little, if any, warning on spill events. And depending upon the circumstances of the spill, it may affect the ability to adequately treat water from the river. So in addition to spills, we also have a need to plan for drought conditions. We are already seeing a wide range of swings in our regional weather patterns. Climate change projections indicate wetter wet years, but deeper droughts. And I'd like to note that the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin has developed and utilizes a hydrologic model of the Potomac River, which is used to forecast long-range river flows. The latest forecast incorporated over 100 climate change models. And despite all the reservoirs in the regional water supply, as noted previously, the results of the river flow forecast indicate that beginning in 2040, the demands may exceed the currently available water supply if the region would experience extreme conditions similar to the worst droughts of record in 1930 and 1966. So based on the above concerns, several water supply studies have been performed by COG for spill events and ICPRB for drought. Both studies indicated the need for a new regional water supply source to satisfy the needs I previously presented. Additionally, on this slide, there have been extensive emergency planning and other initiatives, including an update to the Regional Water Supply Emergency Plan, water quality monitoring systems, flushing protocols for buildings, a source water assessment, laboratory capabilities, coordinated messaging, and public health collaboration. So the cost of a new water supply will be enormous, and something that the utilities will not be able to pass on to their customers alone. As a result, a lot of effort has begun to raise awareness with the federal government and to begin finding sources for funding assistance. ICPRB led the education and outreach to Congress on the risks to regional water supply, need for water storage, and the need for federal funding. Additionally, WSSC Water included a project entitled Regional Water Supply Resiliency in our CIP, and this is a placeholder in the event all other funding solicitation efforts are not successful. Arlington County also has a placeholder in their CIP for a resiliency project. And I'd also like to note that the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection included WSSC Water's Regional Water Supply Resiliency Project on their list of suggested projects to receive federal funding. And with that, I'd like to pass the baton to Lisa Reagan.
With that, we formed a coalition that is the water suppliers, Montgomery County, Arlington County, and ICPRB to really start working with Congress about authorization and appropriations for the Water Resources Development Act. Because this is both a potential public health issue if there's a long-term outage, but it's also a critical, being able to operate critical infrastructure and continuity of government. We really believe that the federal government needs to step up and continue the funding and this once-in-a-generation investment that they did when they created the Washington Aqueduct. So we have two laser-tight goals for this year. We want to authorize the first step, which is a feasibility study in the Water Resources Development Act, and we want to appropriate the money to do that study, because just that first step is going to take 3 years. And because of the way things are in Congress right now, we have the opportunity to possibly get both done for fiscal year 23 instead of having to wait for another fiscal year. And to do this, we have met with both committee staff and our regional congressional delegation staff several times to make them both aware of this issue, but then also we were lucky enough this year to have Representative Holmes Norton introduce language into the Water Resources Development Act so we could get the authorize the feasibility study, our first baby step. The House passed the bill with that version in it. The Senate didn't, because the Senate timeline was ahead of the House. So we're hoping during the reconciliation process, the Senate will add that language to the final bill. And so far we have complete bipartisan support and nobody has been against it. The word of conferencing is happening right now. But as all of you know, this is an election year. So soon we will be looking at people moving out. So we are actually looking, it could either be by the end of September or it'll be during the lame duck session that we would be able to get this authorization and appropriation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
All right, thanks, Lisa. So any large water project completed through the water process takes time and patience, but it is a proven path for getting big things done, and with that necessary federal funding support and certainly cooperation. So we are hopefully here at like the kind of upper left there in the gold at that stage of the first critical steps of a long journey and getting that feasibility study authorized and then appropriated. So subsequent steps you can see through the process require further authorizations and appropriations for each phase. So it will require persistence of advocacy, unity of purpose over the long term. This is a long-term challenge, and we are in it for the long term because we want a resilient region. And so therefore, COG support for that very first step is critical. Next slide. So that reliable and resilient water supply is a foundational assumption to achievement of COG's goals. The resilient water supplies support not just daily operations in our region, in our communities, but also regional population growth and economic growth. It's critical to virtually every part of the planning framework shown here, as prioritized by the COG's Board of Directors. Safe, affordable housing and transportation systems, like Metro Rail, we just talked about, don't operate without that 24/7 firefighting protection. Cooling systems for critical infrastructure, wastewater treatment, food services, hotels, restaurants simply can't function without that water. And then equity goals. To advance equity, reliable and safe water supply must extend to every neighborhood with adequate pressure. So, most of us think about our, daily, think about our drinking water, maybe the bathroom, shower use, but behind the scenes, it's vital for all these other systems to work in our community. And if the Potomac River is providing 78% of what we use, then we need a viable plan B if that source is interrupted. So, in other words, to really advance those interconnected goals, we have to make sure the foundational assumption of reliable water is both real and intact. Next slide. So here's the ask. Approve the resolution to authorize and appropriate the study under WARDA. And after that, provide timely and unified advocacy and outreach with the congressional delegations. And then looking ahead, if we are successful in getting moving ahead through the process, provide the ongoing advocacy, support, and education all the way through to the vision of getting a second operational supply. We respectfully seek your support and are happy to take your questions.
Well, thanks to all of you for that very important, sometimes sobering, but very reflective report. We very much appreciate your leadership on these issues. And as Mr. Manuel intimated, we do have a resolution that we're being asked to consider. It is Resolution R39, 2022. And so why don't we go ahead and get that on the table?
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to move approval of the resolution and then speak to it.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gross has moved approval. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Lusk. Ms. Gross, speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am really, truly excited about this. Mark Twain famously said, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over. And that's exactly what they do in the West, is fight over water. We haven't had to do that here. What you see before you is a fabulous group of cooperative and collaborative agencies. And I think maybe, Dave Snyder isn't here anymore, but I think maybe Phil Mendelson will remember we did a water summit back around 1999 or 2000 at GW. We were very concerned about water quality and water quantity. I don't recall any discussion of resilience. That's, 20 years later or more, we really understand that the resilience issue is huge. And so I wholeheartedly hope we will support this, do the other things that are up there on the bullets, assisting with outreach and helping. People need to understand why we're doing this. Water is something they take for granted. We know from the drought policy that we enacted in 1999 that water is not necessarily something we should take for granted, and there was some fight over that. But I think we really, as local government officials, we need to educate folks about water, about what we've got, what we may not have, what we need to do for the future. That's really important, is what we need to do for the future. Jennings Randolph, Little Seneca, and what's the third one? Yes, have been really, really helpful in all of our plans. We have used them, we have drawn down on them when we needed to, and now we have, so we've got a really great track record. I think we can build on that, and this is exactly what this does. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Allen? Ms. Perry, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not quite as optimistic about this study as Ms. Gross. From what I've heard over the past few years is that the Corps of Engineers is always threatening to sell the aqueduct to some third party. And I'm just wondering if a study right now is an aggressive enough action. Should we be doing something more expedient? I've heard from DC Water. I was disappointed they weren't at the table, but that the aqueduct, there's a threat to be sold to a third party, what that would do to the city, what that would do to the region. So I'm wondering if anyone can speak to that. Should we be more expedient about what we're doing?
So I will start out and then I'll pass it on. One of the other things that we didn't go over as in depth to assist with the aqueduct is we're also supporting language in the bill so that they will have their own borrowing ability from the Treasury Department. Right now they're dependent on, they cannot borrow money, they have to have their customers like DC Water or Fairfax Water do purchases and long-term contracts and things like that. And so having that new financial ability would be a tremendous big step for moving the aqueduct forward. I'll pass it to Jenny, and then I will also mention that Rudy Chow, who's the general manager of the aqueduct, is here to answer questions as well, if need be.
I guess one thing I'd say is that the Washington Aqueduct, the Corps of Engineers, as far as I know, has not ever been advocating a sale of the Washington Aqueduct, nor have the wholesale suppliers of the Washington Aqueduct. We would be opposed to such a sale. That was an effort initiated by the prior administration. There are no current efforts to do so. And I think, at the end of the day, even if that sort of situation were to occur, we still have the same problem, and we need to find a way to solve it. And this study is how we get there.
Thank you.
We're still all going to be using the Potomac.
Mr. Allen.
Thanks. In the previous panel, General Manager Clark said, his goal is to be boring. I think there's few topics beyond water supply resiliency that runs the risk of being boring to a group of elected leaders, but also holds the risk of not being done right if we don't pay attention to it. And we only have to look Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi. We can look at so many examples of where when it's not done right, when the thought isn't put into it, when the intentionality around who is harmed most runs that risk for us to not get it right. So I really appreciate the presentation here, the commitment that I saw throughout it, talking about the need to have equitable solutions as part of that backup. 78% coming from the Potomac. We get it because it's the river that's running through. But to not have a plan and be working toward a plan and a goal to make sure that we've got greater water resiliency, it is incumbent on us to take these actions now. I'd love, as Ms. Perry says, how do we work with more urgency? Would love to keep thinking about that as well. But we all take for granted the fact that we can turn the tap on and just get great, clean drinking water. And when it's not there, one, we know who gets hurt the most when we don't invest the right way. But it's incredibly important. So I absolutely look forward to supporting this resolution. Would love to look for ways for it to be able to work with more urgency because I think it's really important and it kind of gets lost in the mix if we don't kind of keep our foot on the accelerator. So thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Allen, if I could, I just want to emphasize that we take this is urgent and we are taking other steps. It's just this is the big behemoth that we have to work away at. I also want to say that I'm going to put on my research nerd hat for a moment. Governance structure and good governance is having good quality water. And in this region, we have such good cooperation and governance and structure approach that with having our great water that we have and our ability to do that plan. So that's kind of, I want to make sure people keep that in mind when they think about the terrible problems that are in Flint or in Jackson, Mississippi, and what happened in Flint.
Thank you. Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you. Just a quick question, because I know we're running out of time. The act that we're talking about, I guess, adding this language to, do we know how big the pot is going to be, and do we know how much the study is going to cost? I guess I'm just wondering what our chances, happy to support, by the way, the resolution, but what are the chances that we are going to be able to get this done? How much is it going to cost? That sort of thing.
This is the lowest hanging fruit, is the good news. So overall, Tom Hilton could speak to some of the costs in advance for this study. And it's a very common Army Corps of Engineer project study. The cost is $3 million, which for a federal appropriation is not a big chunk of change.
And regarding the project, whatever becomes of the study will then provide recommendations on what the solution would be. There have been some studies already that have looked at some potential solutions. Again, until the Army Corps finishes their study, it's a little suspect as far as what that final recommendation will be. But in looking ahead at potentially what those solutions might be, the order of magnitude of the cost of such a project could be in the order of magnitude of $800 million.
Okay. Chair Dorsey, if I might ask one more question.
Wanting to contribute?
Sorry?
Never mind. Go ahead. Sorry.
So in this process, once we pass this resolution, will COG be working with partner representatives, like Loria, Wexton, and all those folks to actually sign on to this?
We're currently working with all of those offices.
Okay.
And working through, we meet with them regularly. They make sure that other committee staff and other offices are plugged in, and we're keeping our eye on this. So yes, we're absolutely working with the entire region's congressional delegation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Partman, do we have anyone on the WebEx who would like to ask a question? So with that, we'll move to consideration of Resolution R39, 2022. All those in favor, please do signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. That resolution has been approved. Excuse me. Thank you all for participating in today's meeting. Thank you to our panelists from the Water Utilities and COG staff for that last item. I'd just like to say, colleagues, as we think about the substance of today's meeting, the energy that you all brought to the electric vehicle infrastructure conversation, I think, was most welcome and gives staff the necessary momentum and support they need to continue that work, that very important work of making sure our region is not only ready, but can take advantage in a transformative way of the opportunities that are out there. We had a nice introductory conversation with the Metro CEO, and I think you all probably made his week by the enthusiastic welcome that he received from the COG board. And for this issue on water resiliency, I think it's quite remarkable that as a region led by you dedicated professionals, that we are not sitting on a near-term problem to solve. We're actually looking at the nature of our vulnerabilities. We're looking at future trends, and we're deciding to act in a way that puts us in a position so that potential issues do not befall us. That is a rare thing. I don't want us to lose sight that we had a conversation about moving forward and supporting, putting real effort behind coming up with solutions for a problem that is not yet manifest. How often can communities say that? So I am incredibly proud of this meeting and this discussion and all of you. Look forward to our next meeting, which will be held virtually on October 12th. In the meantime, please don't forget to register for the annual meeting in December, as well as submit any nominations for our COG annual awards. And with that, I'd like to seek a motion to adjourn. Mr. Elrich, or did you have something else?
I just have a question.
Sure.
On the 12th, could we have a discussion about regional response to the immigration issue we're dealing with?
You know what? Thank you. And there's one more thing I wanted to mention. So thank you for bringing that up. So I don't know if you all remember, but at the COG board retreat, we did have a conversation about migrants to our region, and we took an action at that point in time to do two things. One, COG staff is actively working with the appropriate agencies throughout our region to support the emergency relief efforts to the degree required and necessary. And then two, we've tasked our Human Services Policy Committee for considering some long-term supportive efforts that we can stand up in the region for migrants. So those are the two actions that we took in July, and so in October would be a perfect time to revisit the work that has been done in that area. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, both Region Forward and the Human Services Policy Committee have taken up that discussion.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gross. Any other questions or comments? Move to adjourn by Supervisor Bailey. I definitely don't see any objections, and an enthusiastic second from Vice Chair Allen. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned.
Well done.
Thank you, man. Thank you, bud. Phil.